Hello, friends, and welcome to the Can We Ask You This podcast. My name is Corey.
And my name is Rosalind.
And we're so thankful for you to join us today. This podcast is a place to hear real stories from real people, gain perspective, maybe get a little bit uncomfortable, and create some change. We want to hold space and give a voice to people who maybe they've been hurt by the church or wonder if they have a place in the church. This podcast is about listening, learning, truly seeing each person as invaluable in the eyes of God. Today, we have a special guest with us, Fern.
Yes, we're so glad to have Fern on the podcast. She's somebody who has experienced a lot, but she is talking about her story of journeying through oral cancer. The ins and outs, she does tell us about the treatment practically, but also just where her faith was and all of that.
Yeah, what I love about her story is she is a counselor. So it's interesting listening her story as she processes something very traumatic, but also through her faith journey, through her expertise in counseling and how that all plays out.
Yeah, it's a really great story. So should we jump in?
Let's jump in. Well, Fern, thank you so much for being here today. It's a joy and an honor to have you here with us, a time where we can learn from you, hear about your journey. And we've had quite a journey, you and me. I feel like we've actually worked together a little bit. And so it's wonderful to see you here in this place, giving back, sharing your story. But not everyone knows you like I do. So
maybe that's a good thing.
I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself, give us some background. Where are you from? Maybe even talk about your family. Who is Fern?
All right. Well, I'm from Calgary. And I've been here about 30 years now. Previous to that, I was in Ottawa and in Montreal, Quebec. I've got a great husband of 44 years.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. And 2 married daughters and 1 grandson in Ontario and the other 3 little girls and 1 brand new baby boy who's only a few days old is here in Calgary. So I have 5 grandchildren.
Wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I'm previously was a pastor here with you guys, and I'm also a counselor.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your story? We know a little bit, but shed a little bit of light on what happened to you during the pandemic. Because I know there's probably lots of directions we could go with your story, but catch us up on the last 3 years.
Sure. Okay. Well, back in October 2020, I had noticed a sore growing on the side of my tongue. And during that pandemic, there was always lots of delays and whatnot. So we were slowly going through the process of trying to figure out what was going on. And finally, after 1 referral to 1 oral specialist, he took a deeper biopsy because I had 2 previously. And he found cancer. And so within a few short weeks, I was admitted into the cancer center here, into hospital, and underwent an 8-hour surgery.
Wow.
Where they did what was called a glossectomy. I'll explain what they are. A glossectomy, a flap, or a partial glossectomy, I should say, a flap, and then I had a neck dissection as well. Wow. And so the glossectomy is where they take out the tumor, remove any part of the tongue that might have still been affected by the cancer, and then they replace it with that flap of skin that they take from my forearm, and then the nerve that's in there. So in my mouth, I have half a normal tongue, and then the other part is the arm flap. So I don't have this.
It really is amazing that that's even an option.
I know. It's pretty cool. Yeah. I'm very thankful because I can speak fairly well.
Yeah.
So, and then the neck dissection, they cut you from behind the ear down to the throat, and they took out 33 lymph nodes.
Wow.
So I guess this kind of cancer can metastasize, and that's the first place they look. So they take them out to test them. Thankfully, mine had not metastasized.
Wow.
But I was diagnosed because of the size and the location and everything as a stage 3.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was that like when you heard the word cancer in relation to you? That's a word that carries a lot of weight and a lot of feelings and, well, just a lot with it. So what was that like for you hearing that?
Yeah, because I knew that there was something wrong. I was relieved in many ways. Previously, I had had a couple of scares with cancer, breast cancer, and I didn't have it, but the shock of the word really impacted me. So I hear what you're saying about that shock with the C letter coming at you. But this time, it was more of a relief because I knew there was something wrong, and now we could attend to it. So that was a bit of a relief that way, as I said.
How did your family react, or how did you approach, kind of understanding now that you have oral cancer? Did you share that with your family and friends, or how did you approach telling people?
Mm-hmm. Being the private person that I am, I didn't really want to tell too many people. I knew I had to tell my family, so my husband, who was there with me during it all, knew. I was worried about telling my kids because I didn't want them to worry, because the first thing you often think of is, oh no, you're going to pass away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so we really weren't sure what the journey was going to look like, so I wanted to wait and find out a bit more before I told them. So it took me a few days to tell them. And then with my friends, my closest friends, I told them afterwards. And then after a while, I realized that keeping it quiet probably wasn't the best thing for me because, secrets aren't good, right? And because they just kind of eat away at you. And so I contacted as many faithful prayers that I knew. And I emailed them and asked them to pray for me. And that just really made a huge difference for my journey, knowing that people were kind of holding me up in prayer.
Yeah, that you had the support.
I had that support. It was amazing,
Yeah.
And I think it's just a side note here, but you said you're very private. You didn't want to tell many people, and here you are.
I know.
On a
On a podcast.
Go figure that. And I don't like public speaking. Go figure.
Well,
Yeah.
God has amazing ways of changing our minds about things. Hey?
Indeed.
Can you walk us through a little bit of what the treatment was like for you? So you had the 8-hour surgery, and then what was, I imagine that
The
wasn't
after
the
part?
end of it.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So after the 8-hour surgery, they put you into ICU. My husband was allowed to come during that time, so that was kind of nice.
Yeah.
And this was during
During COVID.
COVID. Yeah.
And there were restrictions.
Yeah.
Then the next 11 days, I wasn't allowed a single human being in there to see me. No husband, no kids, no friends.
Wow.
That was so hard.
11 days in isolation, basically.
Well, no, not in isolation, but in a room by myself
Yeah.
for at least 8 of those days. And the only people that came to visit were my doctors, who were absolutely wonderful, and the nurses, who were great as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of alone time.
It was a lot of alone time, yeah. So I did a lot of writing, a lot of reading, a lot of texting.
Mm-hmm. What was so it was 11 days. What were they, was that recovering from the 8-hour surgery?
Yes.
And then,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
then what?
So after the surgery, what they do every hour is they actually run this Doppler along the tongue to make sure it's still alive and working, because all the nerves are attached in different, from my arm to my mouth, right?
Wow.
Right.
I know, it's kind of cool. So they monitor that regularly, and then they monitored me probably in every single way that they needed to make sure I was in good shape and good form and recovering well. And they have pathways posted on the wall, so they want you to hit certain milestones. And the first 4 days I had a tracheostomy because my mouth was all swollen, and the food tube,
Right.
Yeah.
I had tubes everywhere. And so I couldn't speak. So the food that was going, or I couldn't eat either, rather, the food was going in through the food tube. So they have to monitor you in every way. And then also they had drainage tubes coming from my neck. So they check those regularly.
How long were you in hospital for?
So a total of 11 days. So the first
Okay.
8 days I was really recovering well, and then went home for
Okay.
I think 2 days, and then landed back in because I had a neck infection. So then they took care of me again, and then I was all good and shipshape, and they sent me home.
So
Wow.
what was the treatment like
Yeah.
after that? Because I'm assuming it
Yeah.
wasn't
Oh, no,
11
that was just
days.
the beginning.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
right?
No,
Yeah.
so after a couple of weeks, they want all your surgery to heal, because then it was recommended that I go and get radiation. And so after my neck healed up, I started the radiation treatment. And so that was an interesting experience. I couldn't feel it. Like, you don't feel it when you're getting radiation, right? You don't feel anything. It's just really scary because of the process, the leading up. Even just walking down through the hallways, down to the stairs to follow the yellow line, that would create anxiety. So I remember monitoring my heart one time, and it went up to double my resting heart rate.
Wow.
Just
Were
by
you just
being
sitting
there.
there, just
Yeah,
anxious?
I was lying on a table.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they create this special mask for head and neck patients. So I had this whole mask around my face down to about my chest area. And then they kind of clip it down, 5 different clips, to the table. And so you're lying there, and you have to lie as still as you can. And they roll your chair back, and the machine comes over you and does its beeping and stuff and calibrating. And then you hear the noise, and I could just feel the anxiety raising. And the radiation's only about a minute long, and then you're done.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it's
Caused-
all the buildup that
Yes. Yeah.
doesn't sound fun.
No, it wasn't.
How
But
many
they're
times did you have
pretty
to do
amazing.
that?
30 times.
30 times?
Every day, yeah. Every day except weekends.
Wow.
Is that because they took out the cancer from your tongue, but why the radiation?
Yeah. Although when you have cancer, they try to make sure they cut a little bit extra away to make sure there's no cancer left. But they found that the cancer was trying to get through somewhere in one of my nerves. So they said, just to be a caution, that's a good thing to do. And also the size of the tumor dictates whether or not you're at a different stage. And so it was a bit bigger than what they had first anticipated. So that's why they recommended it.
What was like you said, radiation doesn't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Was your body sore or tired afterwards?
Oh yeah, there were lots of side effects. You get burns on your neck
Wow.
and sores in your mouth.
Oh,
So
man.
it's already hard to swallow because you're swollen, right, early on. And then when you get sores in your mouth, it's hard to eat anything. So I was eating at first liquids, and then I graduated to like baby food kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And even that was hard to swallow in my mouth. And so they give you extra rinses to kind of clear that up. And then the exhaustion was probably the hardest. And so I often had to have naps. So by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was wiped.
Mhm.
And it would be like a light switched right off, and I would be all of a sudden very, very tired.
Wow.
And I would say that it took about a year and a half to start to feel like I had any energy.
Wow.
And it's
Mhm.
crazy because you said it's really just a minute that it's happening, and
Mhm.
but just that build up over 30 days, doing it every day, that would be really,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot on your body.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sure is.
And for the treatment, was that the end of the treatment, so to speak? Was the surgery, radiation, and then
Recovery.
Recovery.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
was the recovery process like for
Mhm.
you?
So the recovery process taught me that I needed to care for myself and listen to my body. When perhaps previously I might just push through and say later I'll take care of myself.
Mhm.
So now I kind of switched that up. So when I'm tired, I rest. Even now, if I need a little cat nap, I'll do it. Food was really important. So I needed to make sure that everything going in gave me energy. And so after radiation, or even during radiation, they bump up all your protein. So I had to eat lots of extra stuff.
Mhm.
And then exercise was critical. So they have a cancer exercise program, actually. And I started that at the beginning of my radiation treatment.
Even
and
though you're so
continued.
tired.
Even though you're so tired, because it gave me the energy I needed.
Wow.
Yeah, and it gave me a little bit of community.
Mm.
And then I took advantage of little online classes just to keep myself engaged in groups
Mhm.
and kind of communicating, because it was all during the pandemic. We were isolated.
Right.
And I knew that God created us for community, so I needed to be in community. And I would also go for walks, tons and tons of walks. I would bundle up. I'd have heaters in my hands,
Just,
and I'd go out and walk. Mhm.
wow.
So reflecting back, what were the hard days like? I mean, we talked about isolation. I mean, those were incredibly hard days. And what was the hardest part for you in this journey?
Well, I think the hardest part for me was all the emotions that came up. I had tons of them. Fear was the worst. And because I didn't know why I got cancer and I didn't have all the risk factors, I was one of those lucky people that were in the 7% that don't know why. They're not-
Especially this type of cancer, right? It's
Mhm.
not like,
Mhm.
this one is usually one that's lifestyle.
Lifestyle, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. And
So you don't know why you got oral cancer?
no.
Okay.
No. And so the not knowing was
Mhm.
probably the hardest. And I also would have a lot of fear, because what was going through my head was, if I knew why I got cancer, then I could stop doing it
Right.
and it wouldn't come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because I was stage 3, and unfortunately I did go online and look at all the stuff that they told me not to look at.
Mhm.
As we all do.
Dr. Google.
Dr. Google. And so then I had that in my head. And so I had to kind of make sense of all of the not knowing and just really trust God and being able to be okay with where I was at, because everything was happening so quickly and everything changed almost overnight for me. And so that unknowing created a lot of fear in the beginning. And I had to finally get to a place where I was okay not knowing.
Is that hard? I imagine if you don't know the cause, like you said, you have no control. Was that hard to let go of that sense of control? Like you actually can't necessarily do anything to make sure it doesn't happen again. Was that hard to let go of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, especially in our society, we're all about having control and being in control and being strong. And it just meant I had to undo all of that. So I did lots of work around trying to let go and just trust God that no matter what the outcome is, it's going to be okay.
You know, and thinking through all the emotions that you're dealing with, the fear, I'm assuming anxiety, unknown, loss of control. What carried you through? How did you handle all the emotion?
Well, thankfully, with my training, I can recognize when I'm starting to go a little bit out of my own regulation of my emotions, right? And so I would do things that I call my spiritual disciplines. So anything that had to do with caring for myself from a body perspective, a mind perspective, and a spirit perspective. So I would do deep breathing, something as simple as breathing to kind of help regulate my emotions, and different grounding exercises to make sure that I wasn't kind of exiting and getting over emotional. I was not always successful in that because it can be very overwhelming. I remember every time I'd wake up in the morning, I could feel myself. And when I blinked, when I ate, when I breathed, when I spoke, it was very overwhelming. And so there was one point in time where I was quite discouraged, and I remember sitting with my doctor, and he was cleaning my wound and just kind of chatting, and I made a comment about how amazing it is that the body heals. And he very quietly said, it was designed that way. And that just stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, I never thought of that before, right? And the little thought came through my mind. I think it went like this: how you are today is not how you're going to be tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think when we get in this place of overwhelm, we think this is the way it's always going to be. And it isn't. And so that began me on that real good journey of recognizing that things are going to just be what they are day by day, and I have to just face each day as it came. And knowing that God was with me made all the difference. And I would just take those disciplines that I did, prayer, that deep breathing, reading scriptures, connecting with my community of people whom I love, my family, my friends. That was huge and very healing. And then even doing creative things, like I'm a watercolor artist, and so I made sure that I painted regularly. And then I also journaled a lot to get all of what was inside me out. And then it came to a place that I was so overwhelmed at one point, I thought, I need some help. So I actually went and saw a psychologist. And I don't know about other counselors, but we typically don't like going to see other people.
Your own worst patient, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like, I know what he's going to ask. I know what he's looking for. I know. Right? But, it was just so helpful. He said to me, when you avoid things, it can cause more anxiety. And I was suffering from anxiety with all of this stuff happening all at once. And he said, it's okay to postpone sometimes, but you have to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, it's not postponement, it's avoidance. And that was really a clear message to me too. No, you got to keep working at your inner world.
It's probably nice to have a third party perspective, just to, even though you probably knew what he was going to say, when you're in that headspace of anxiety, you all actually probably didn't expect that answer.
No, I kept forgetting things.
Yeah. Right?
I kept forgetting the stuff that I already knew and practiced. And then every once in a while, God would bring back these people to remind me of what was true. And then once I started listening to those folks, then I realized, I need to keep practicing my soul care.
So you touched on this a little bit, but what sort of lifestyle changes have you had to go through early on, and what has carried through to today? As far as practical things?
Well, lifestyle changes. Oh, there's lots. I would say, I can go into the list, but you probably don't want to hear it all. But little things like I have to sleep at an incline now. So my bed's raised, right? Yeah. And I have to have moisture in the air in the bedroom when I sleep at night. And I can't eat everything that I want. I can eat most things, but not everything. Like I would love a really good steak. Can't do that. Can't chew it.
Oh, okay.
Can't swallow it. It's too hard. Yeah, and so food is a definite thing. Taste is another thing. I get really excited when I can taste really good stuff, like an orange. Just blows up in my mouth. It's
there you go.
wonderful.
Right, because you only have about half the taste buds you used to, right? Yeah, arms don't taste.
Yeah, but they say we get taste in other places other than just our tongue.
Okay, that's
right.
cool.
So that's
didn't
kind
know
of
that.
nice. Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Well, now you do for sure, by
Yeah.
experience, I'm sure.
And then just the oral care regime, I have to be really careful. So interestingly enough, if I eat any kind of junk food or anything that's processed, I will get sores. And so I'm super healthy now. And if
Wow.
I want any kind of treats, I have to make it myself. So I do lots of soda and salt rinses every day, 3-4 times a day, and I'm in good shape. And every night I have to give myself a fluoride treatment. And that's just because the bones and that area where I was radiated, it changes the blood flow. And so we have to keep our mouths super clean so that nothing gets
There's not
deteriorated.
That same immune system response that it normally would be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, I think, yeah.
just with blood flow and things in those areas.
I'm not sure about the immune part there, but I did end up getting other health conditions, but I am now immunocompromised because of those. It's an autoimmune disease, yeah.
So kind of jumping off lifestyle, but a different approach. I would love to ask you about your identity. How did this whole experience impact, your understanding of who Fern was and is going to be? How did this all impact your identity?
Well, considering I often would teach about identity, I thought that I kind of knew who I was. And I do know that we're made in the image of God. I know that. And I'm very firm on that. Yet, it's interesting how we are able to allow our society to influence how we look or how we sound and let that impact our identity. And I would almost tie that to this idea of wholeness too, right? Like I know that God created us in his image and he created good things. So what does that mean when we change, right? Or we're affected by our surgery or a disability or who knows what that can happen to us. And when I started thinking about this idea of wholeness, early on I wanted to go back to my old normal. Because if I knew I was my old self, then I'd be me again.
Right.
But I realized that maybe the me that I'm supposed to be is the me I am now, with the transformation and the changes. And that idea of wholeness doesn't mean to have a perfect body or a perfect speech type or a perfect look, but it's more about the presence of God with us and in us and through us. And so when I started to embrace this idea of wholeness, I started to feel more real, I guess, more me, more authentic, which I think is a good place. And in many ways, I would think back and say, I'm more me now than I was before.
Isn't that wild?
Like you literally lost a piece of yourself,
Yeah.
but you feel more you. That is amazing testimony of just
The goodness.
God in you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Goodness of God. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Was there a time, I mean, these are all wonderful things, but was there a time where you felt angry at God?
No, I never really got angry at him, but I sure had that why question come up.
The questions.
Yeah, the questions. Why? Why did I get cancer? And I knew that God is a good God. I never blamed him. I would probably err more on blaming myself. What did I do? Did I not care for myself? If I cared for myself better, did I work too hard? Was I under too much stress? All those things went through my mind because I didn't attribute it to God. But I think that what I also searched for was, how is God going to use this? What did he want me to learn from it? Those were the two questions I also began to think about that really helped shape where I am today and doing what I'm doing today.
So I want to ask, and you shared a little bit about some of your coping mechanisms, because you are a counselor at heart and you've learned all these tools. So I love that you've shared that you did go see a psychologist. That you did take those steps. But as you're journeying through this experience, what tools in your toolbox did you end up using the most?
I think the very most would be writing. And often I would write to God. And I would just kind of pour out my heart. And then asking healthy questions, right? Trying to look at things through God's perspective. That was really helpful. And then also, as I mentioned before, kind of like I guess maybe the way that I look at it, I mean, God's in this journey with me, but I also can participate. So whatever I do is just a really nice fit with what God is doing. So I've tried my best to do what I think he would want me to do. So take care of myself, those kinds of things. Pray to him. One of the things about soul care that I like to talk about is it's something that I learned in my fitness classes. Strength doesn't come by just bearing more burdens. Strength comes by letting a burden down. And so when we let a burden down, we are allowing ourselves to release something to God. And so when we release something to God, he takes it and he gives us stuff back fullfold. And so it's that whole journey of taking that time with him that was huge. So that was my biggest spiritual practice, is spending the quiet time with God, listening, praying, journaling. Those were the key things for me. And then I also know that God's created us for community. And I made sure that I was with people who loved me and would feed into me and encourage me through that time. And that was huge as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
So you have written a book to talk about your story. Can you tell us what motivated you to write that book?
Well, as I said, I was journaling early on in the hospital because I couldn't speak and I couldn't be around people. So that was one really key outlet for me. And what I did also was I started a little blog for those people that were praying for me. And I would just send them snippets of my day so that they could be kept up to date. And several of them contacted me or emailed me afterwards and said, Fern, you need to write something. And I thought, who's going to want to hear my story? But then as I thought about it, I thought, well, I don't even know stage 3, if I'm going to be here much longer. What happens if I could write for my kids, leave a legacy? So that's how it started. And then as more people encouraged me, they said, I think you need to write something more formal. So I actually prayed about it and thought about it and decided, if it helps one person, then I'm going to write a book.
Wow.
So that's how it started.
And the book itself isn't just for cancer patients. It can be for anyone facing difficult times.
Yeah.
Can you explain kind of your approach in writing the book for not just cancer patients, but people who are struggling?
So I wrote the book, like the backdrop is my cancer story, but I also bring in other stories as well through the book. And there's a major focus on those spiritual practices and the soul care practices that we can use when we're going through any kind of unexpected crisis. And I really don't think my cancer journey is really any different or not that much different than anyone else going through a crisis, because we all go through those different stages of not knowing what to do and how to cope and how to tell people our story or who not to tell, all those kinds of things. And how do we persevere when we don't know what the outcome's going to be or what the future is, because that can create a lot of fear. And so I take it from kind of a threefold perspective. One is the patient, the cancer patient going through it. Secondly, I try to be as vulnerable as I can in those pieces and be authentic about the stuff that we do face, because I figure someone like me who has the training and background that I have still was scared, still had a hard time and still needed to work through it all. And then the other part is I take a bit of a counselor's perspective and a pastoral perspective from a faith component, and I look at it from a body, mind, spirit, holistic, and we talk about wholeness as well. So it's a bit different.
I have heard you talk about 3 different kinds of hope. Can you walk us through those, if you don't mind? Because I found them really interesting when you and I had talked about it before.
Yeah. I've actually added a 4th one.
Oh, 4?
There we go.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, and I'll bet you there's more too. So
okay, so the 4+ type of hope.
Yeah, exactly. Number 5 to come as I gain wisdom, because I think in many ways I'm still learning how to do all this stuff and do it well, because always new things crop up and
you're
we're
not the
constantly
same
changing.
today as you were yesterday.
That's
right.
That's
So,
right.
yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. That was a nice touch.
Oh, well,
Right. So in my book I talk about hope, and I think because there's in our society we have so much available to us, we can easily misplace hope. And I'm no different than anyone else. And so I do all of these as well, just so that you know. So we can hope for good weather, right? Or warm weather. That's a kind of a simple wish. And we're not so bent on how the outcome is. And then there's a little bit more of a bigger hope that we put more effort into, like, I really like that job. maybe a job offer or get into to a group that I'd like to get into. And we're a bit disappointed if it doesn't happen, but it doesn't affect us. It's not going to change our life that much. And then this third hope is the kind of hope that a community of loving others bring, right? So we're called to be the hands and feet of Jesus. So when I'm in community with other people, they feed into my life, I feed into theirs, and it's reciprocal. And so that's a kind of foretaste, I guess, of heaven that we can have through our communities. And then when we have gotten to a place where we seem to have nothing else, there's that enduring kind of hope, the kind of hope that brings that wholeness and healing that only God can bring. And that's his presence, God's presence in us and with us and through us. And that enduring hope is really based on his character, his purposes, and his ways. So that's that kind of hope. And I think when we get so, I'm guilty of this is why I can say I. When I put my hope in my circumstances, I wanted to go back to my old normal. Yet, one lady who's in my community, I have a small two other ladies I meet with on a bi-weekly basis for spiritual growth together. And we started that during the pandemic, and we keep going now. She said, it's hard for us to even imagine that our future could be better than what our past was. And that really stuck with me as well.
Yeah.
And that's what hope brings, that idea of our future can possibly even be better than what our old normal was. And I would say in my case it definitely is, even though I'm disfigured or sound funny.
You don't
or
appear disfigured.
I'm not now. You should have seen me before. Yeah, I hide it well.
I do have a question that I've been thinking about as you've been talking. You said before you were looking at your life going, what did I do that gave me this cancer? And now you talk about your rhythms of your day, and you have to do these, did you say fluoride rinse or something?
Yeah, fluoride.
Yeah, and just
Salt
these,
water rinses.
yeah, lots of, you have to eat differently and all these things. But it seems like you're doing them out of not a place of anxiety, which is interesting because it sounds like you were anxiously looking for the cause and now you're preventing it with these behaviors. What's been the mental switch for you in doing these things? I guess you're preventing it.
So I invest in myself and my soul care because I know it's good for me. But I don't tie it to an outcome. But I don't want to be the cause of any future pain for myself. So if I eat, I want to say what it is, but I better not, a treat, I suffer afterwards. So why would I do that for myself, right? So I would have a different treat instead. So it's an alternative. And so it's accepting where I'm at, and that where I'm at is okay, and that I'm still good enough even when I'm not the old me. And that this new me has brought, I'm 60 pounds lighter, so I'm healthier. I had my doctor say to me, she said, oh, your cholesterol is way down. And I said, oh, that's great. And she said, yeah, so what medicine do we have you on? I said, nothing. She couldn't believe it.
Wow.
And so just eating healthily and active health style and intentionally being in community and just allowing myself to be more authentic and vulnerable, I think that's what makes the difference. And it's okay that, I didn't tell you I have to put these little saliva pills on the side of my mouth every night.
Sounds so glamorous.
It sounds so glamorous. At least I don't have to wear my warm socks to bed anymore.
Oh, I do
That's
that and I don't have to.
But I've accepted me with all those limitations, and it's okay because, everyone has limitations. These happen to be mine.
It's
but
funny,
God is still good.
I heard somebody say, we were not put on this earth to be human doings. We were here to be human beings. And it sounds like even though you have to do a lot of things, it's in order to be and not to accomplish something. Whereas before it sounds like you were searching for answers of what you did wrong.
Yeah.
And now you're able to just be a human being.
I'm much more accepting of kind of my circumstances and where I am in life. And it's definitely good.
Cool.
In your book, you talk about wholeness. And when I hear you use words like, disfigured and how do you approach wholeness to feel whole? And I think about for someone who's listening, who doesn't have what you have as far as the feelings of wholeness and with your whole world changed and kind of flipped upside down. How do you feel whole? What does it
feel like?
Yeah.
It feels peaceful. It feels content. Yeah. I think those would be the two words that come to mind first. And it also is about a bit of this idea of persevering still. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing my work that I need to do to be attentive to God's presence and God at work in me and through me. so that it's a relational thing too, right?
To feel whole.
To feel whole,
Okay.
yeah. And it doesn't mean that someone's going to magically tap me on the head with a wand and say, now you're whole. I think it's a mindset, a perspective, and a journey. And there are days where I might forget. I just have to remind myself that God is good. He's with me, and there's a purpose for my journey. And it doesn't mean that He caused it, but that there's a purpose in it, and it's a good purpose.
And one thing that stood out to me in the book is when you said the hurting doesn't mean you aren't healing.
Yeah.
And what a powerful statement for your journey, that even through the hurting, you are healing, you are finding wholeness on this journey.
Yeah. And sometimes it has to hurt to heal, right? So when we process our emotions, sometimes we feel that wounding again. But when we do it with a safe person, there's variations of emotion, right? There's like difficult ones, and then there's little t trauma and big T trauma ones. Depending on which one it is, it's important that we get the right kind of help so that we're safe in that processing, because it does hurt.
I love your willingness to find help, to ask for help, to journey towards it, to know that you shouldn't do this alone, that even through COVID and isolations, that you continue pressing towards community. Thank you for sharing how important that was in your healing journey and finding wholeness.
Yeah. I think in the beginning, I used to think asking for help was a sign of weakness. And it's actually, I'm changing that thought to it's a sign of strength.
Yeah.
And it takes courage. But once you do, you never regret it. At least I didn't.
Yeah.
I was just so thankful that, and now I wouldn't hesitate. And I think that's what makes me feel freer to share my story.
So if you had to identify one thing you've learned from the journey of dealing with cancer, what would that be? I mean, there's so many great things we've talked about, but if you had to have one thing.
One thing. Oh, yikes.
I mean, you can have two.
Okay, fine, 7. No.
So
Just
3.
kidding.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's so many good things, like I said, that we've talked about, but
Well, I think the ultimate thing is God is good. And He's with us, even in the darkest moments. We just have to ask. That would the one thing. And I knew He was always there before, but sometimes you forget. And the other thing would be, I guess if I can say two things, is it's important to remember what we know to be true and remind ourselves of it. Because when we get overwhelmed, all of those things that we know to be true can easily fly away on us. And we can get so stuck on our circumstances, we forget that goodness and that truth. And that's what brings hope.
So what helped you remind yourself of those things, or who helped remind yourself of those?
Well, early on, when I was having my tracheostomy removed, I think I told Rosie this story before, but it was really probably the most difficult part of my recovery. And I was having a really hard time breathing. And a little thought came into my mind, and so I'm thinking it's from God. I don't think I'm this wise. The thought was, what has helped you in the past? So that's a great question we can ask ourselves. What has helped you in the past? And for me, it was praising God. So the idea of the doxology song came to my mind. And I just started singing that in my head because I couldn't speak. And that just brought me a real sense of peace. So that remembering of who has helped me in the past, what has helped me in the past, I think are two really great questions.
So you've had quite this journey that I'm sure you had no idea that you would land here in this place. And all the places that you've been. What's in store for Fern in the future?
Well, I've been doing lots of speaking engagements, and writing, obviously the book was the big thing. And now what we're going to be doing in the near future is setting up a program called Journey of Hope, which is a cancer survivor network here at the church. And so that's going to bring together cancer survivors and caregivers who want to be part of a faith-based support group. I know that when I was going through all of my treatment and my recovery, I wasn't able to find anything that was able to help me integrate that faith-based thing, and I figured it might be something that others might be willing to do. And so as we get that settled here, then we hope to share it with other churches so that they can offer the same kind of programs in their communities.
So you wrote one book.
And now it's just a facilitator's guide.
just.
Yeah.
Is there anything on your heart for another book, perhaps? Or are you happy with where things are right now?
I can hear my husband chuckling, but I'm happy where I am right now. If God wants me to write something, yes, I guess I would do that, of course, right?
Of course,
But
yeah.
I think right now this is where I really feel called to be and to be doing.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing great responses from it. We've even got a men's Bible study group going to be studying the book, a book club,
Cool.
different groups of people, and none of them are cancer patients. So I'm
Yeah.
really thrilled that it's expanding in that way. So I think that will keep me busy enough. I'm supposed to be retired.
You're not very good at it. But thank you so much, Fern, for taking the time to share your story, for writing this book, and giving us some insights on hope and the healing process.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And you guys asked so many questions, I wasn't able to use my cheat sheets.
Oh, yeah, that's how we do it here. So I would love for you to share, what is one thing that you would like our listeners to hear from your message, that maybe a piece of advice or your kind of one last thought before we wrap up?
Okay, so I think the main thing is God created us to be whole. That's part of his story for us. Like, that is so huge. That was huge for me. I think it can be huge for others too. And I would expand that definition of whole, not to go back to your normal, but to be whole, body, mind, spirit, all of that. And whatever that looks like, it doesn't necessarily mean physical healing, because that soul healing is something that God brings, as I said, in his presence, right? And I would encourage people to, whether you're a cancer patient or not, to practice spiritual disciplines, because as you strengthen those in your life, they build a resilience so that when those hard days come, and they will come for all of us, that actually helps us get prepared. Because I know that if I hadn't been as prepared as I was going in, I probably wouldn't be doing as well as I am today.
Well, thank you so much, Fern, for taking the time to share your story and share these insights that I know, like you said, are valuable for so many people, not just cancer patients. And it's been awesome talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And you guys have made it lots of fun for me too.
Thanks for being with us, Fern.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a wonderful interview. It was so great to have Fern. One thing that she wrote in her book, a question she asked herself was, will I ever be able to speak again?
Yeah.
And here we are.
And she said she's been doing a lot of public speaking.
Yeah,
It's
right.
incredible. Yeah.
I love that. I love that through her journey, she's able to share her experiences through her faith journey, even as a counselor, how she used some of the tools, but also her willingness to go and ask for help.
Yeah.
I think that stands out to me, of just, we all can ask for help. We all,
Yeah.
to be honest, we all need help at one point or another, and that there's strength in asking for help. It's not a weakness to ask for help.
Yeah. I think I really related to Fern. I'm not a counselor, but I had very similar thoughts when I was going to therapy, because I have a undergrad in psychology. So I was like, I know what she's going to do. Me with the big ego. And I left there going, oh, that's not at all how I thought it was going to go. And so it's interesting, like, hearing from Fern saying, like, I was sure it was going to go a certain way. But when you are in a place of anxiety and fear, sometimes you just have those goggles on and you need someone to take them off for you and show you the light at the end of the tunnel or some different paths forward. So I love that she talked about that.
And also that just in life, we can't really change the environment or control the environment or circumstances that we face.
Yeah.
But we're able to change how we perceive and think about them. And
That we can control.
That we can
Yeah.
control. And seeing how, for her, a lot of how her self-care, spiritual practices like came into play for her own healing journey, and how that really brought wholeness in her life. Like,
Yeah.
and it wasn't just one thing. As we said, there's lots of things, right? There was lots of things that led to her finding wholeness. And so being able to be open with her own journeys, it might not be oral cancer, but we've all experienced pain and suffering in some form or another. But how does our own faith journeys lead towards wholeness and what that looks like? So lots to think about, absolutely.
I think one more thing too is just the way that she incorporated the physical body with the spirit and the mind, and how it all interacts. And so I think that's one thing I love a lot about Jesus, but he gives us many different paths to speak to him, because he knows we're not just spiritual, we're not just intellectual, we are full human people that we need to take deep breaths sometimes, and we need to eat good food that gives us energy. And we also need to pray and invite Jesus into that process. So I like that she encompassed all of that. So
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
So thank you, Fern, for sharing your story with us and being very vulnerable, authentic. And obviously, if you'd like to hear more about her story, we will leave in the show notes, we'll leave a link to the book. She's on the social media channels, so we can put that.
Yeah, we can tag her in
We'll tag her and all that stuff. And it's well worth the read. So highly recommend to pick it up. And you don't have to be suffering to pick it up. I think that's what's so beautiful, is anyone can pick it up and learn for themselves, or also even how to be a support to someone else.
We all need hope.
We all need hope.
So, and hey, if you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would subscribe to the show and give us a review, only 5 stars, leave a comment. And if you're on Spotify, you can also just write what you liked, what you thought about this episode. We have a little question underneath every episode. What were your thoughts, takeaways? Go ahead and join the chat there. We'd love to interact with you there.
And thank you so much, Ryan, for all your time, effort, energy, creativity, thoughtfulness that comes into
taking
editing.
out all the ums and likes and pauses.
Yeah, we appreciate you so much. So,
Yeah.
And for you, listener, obviously we wouldn't be here without listeners. So we're really grateful for you for joining us on this journey of the Can We Ask You This podcast.
Until next time.
Until next time.